What I'd like to do is kind of walk you all through what a genetic counselor is and what we can do in a clinic in relation to both CDGs and more generally genetic disorders, and then use two case examples to talk about some of the lessons I've learned since working in the Undiagnosed Diseases program at NIH. So I thought first, of course, I should tell you what genetic counseling is in case some of you aren't familiar with it. It's still a relatively new field, but it's booming. So it's the process of helping people understand and adapt to the medical, psychological, and familial implications of genetic contributions to disease, which sounds great and all, but sometimes I say that and people still don't know what I'm talking about. So when I say what I do, I say that I help people who either have a genetic disease, they might be at risk of having a genetic disease, or they have family members with a known genetic disease, and they want more information about that, whether it's about themselves and their risks, or what it means to have a disease be genetic, and what that means for family, but also what that means for them as a person, both emotionally and psychologically. So there's a lot going on, I guess. I think the easiest way to tell you all about what a genetic counselor does is using a case example. So this is a recent case from the Undiagnosed Diseases program, and as you can see, it's a pedigree. For most people, the first thing they do when they meet a genetic counselor is walk through the medical history of the person they're talking about and then the family history, right? Because part of my job is helping to interpret family history and see if there are clues or other symptoms there that can lead us in a direction for a diagnosis. In this pedigree, we see that we have two girls, 5 and 3 years old, who seem to be affected with the same thing, but otherwise their family history is fairly unremarkable, right? Everything else in there, high cholesterol, ADHD, autism, those are fairly typical things. And once you start asking people about their family, you expect that everyone has something going on in their family like that. So to give you a little bit more background on these girls, they presented to the Undiagnosed Diseases program with pretty severe developmental delay, low muscle tone. Interestingly, the severe hypoglycemia, so very low blood sugars that the parents monitored regularly and were very on top of keeping track of that. And we learned a few other things while they were there with us. At the end of their admission to the UDP, our baseline assumption is that they have the same thing, though the younger girl might be more significantly affected. And it led us to this list of differential. And the reason that's important for me as a genetic counselor is because part of my job is helping talk to the families about what each of these disorders, these broad categories of disorders, might mean for them, both in terms of recurrence risk, how are we going to test for it, what additional information might be warranted, or what follow-up studies might we do. And additionally, working with professionals, helping them figure out, what genetic testing should we order? What's the best lab to do that? What's the most cost-effective way of getting this done? To date, they've had an incredibly thorough workup, and we have yet to figure it out. But we're going to keep trying, so hopefully we'll have an answer for that family. But so most of the time, I'm meeting with just an individual family, right? The immediate family. Whether the patient is there or not tends to depend on the age of the patient and how participatory they could be. But in addition to the medical things and the things that, of course, you want answers to, like what are genes, what does it mean for it to be genetic, how does a gene work, and why does it matter that there's a change in it, the part of my job that I enjoy the most is talking about families more globally about what this means for them. So how are the parents coping with all of this? How are you doing raising two children who have special needs? When do you have a chance to be parents to your children and not medical caregivers to your children? Overwhelmingly, parents become the experts in their children and take on much of the responsibility of making medical decisions. And the counseling session should be a place to discuss all of that and find out if they need more support or more resources. As we heard 2 talks ago, we also spend a lot of time talking to siblings. What does it mean for them? In a situation like this, if the girls had been older, what does it mean for the younger one to see her sister? Does she feel like she's following that footsteps? Does she feel like she's watching her future unfold in front of her? So it's a lot about family functioning and what this means in a non-medical sense, if you will. So less of the science and more of the personal interactions. Of course, the science is important, right? And a lot of times people want to know, like the question that was brought up, I'm interested in having another child. What are my risks? How do I plan for that? What do I do? And so a lot of what I do is education about that as well. But as you all probably know, sometimes just hearing facts and numbers, and I could, spew out tons of facts and recurrence risks and show you the math and how I arrived at them, that's often irrelevant to how it feels and the way you're approaching the decision, right? And sometimes approaching a decision to have another child when you have a child with something genetic going on, I think it's a very unique decision, right? You suddenly have a lot more information that you're dealing with, and how am I going to make this decision? How do I weigh these risks and benefits that before didn't exist when when my partner and I sat down to have our first child? And in a lot of cases, what does it mean to say, I want another child, but I don't want that child to have the same condition that my current child does? What's the value of that? It can be a very heavy thing to say, I love my child, but I don't want to see another kid have to suffer through this. And so we talk a lot about that, because I think mixing the education part of why this is relevant to you today is what's most important. But of course, genetics, it's a family affair. It involves everybody, not just the immediate family. And a lot of times people come and they say, well, I'm okay with the information I have, but gosh, my sister won't leave me alone. She keeps asking, what are her risks? What do I tell her to do? And, I've got enough on my plate. I don't want to deal with her. Or my brother who says, well, is our mental health history part of this? Could that be all related? Or the grandparent who says, should we have seen this coming? Is this my fault? Did I pass something on? Genetics involves everybody. And a lot of times once you start looking for things, more things crop up, right? So it's kind of like a Pandora's box. You want to know why you're asking so you know what to do when you get that answer. But genetic counselors are uniquely trained to help you do that. We can help you work with family members and give them the information, or put them in touch with people who can directly address their concerns without you having to be the mediator and the go-between for it all. Also, what often comes up is we take this family history and people say, why are we doing this? There's nothing in my family history. My family is healthy. There's never been a clue. I don't know how we would have known it was going to happen. You can ask all these questions you want, but I promise you there's nothing else going on. No one has what my kid has, right? And the bottom line of all of that when I hear people say that is, no one has what my kid has. I don't know anyone else out there who's going through what I'm going through. And so part of that, I think, is it's the part of my job that I'm most interested in a research perspective. So I'm most interested in this uncertainty that exists in the rare and undiagnosed community. And I think a great metaphor is that it's often like living on an island, right? Nobody else in your family has this. None of your friends have a kid with this. It's very hard to find someone else who has a child with the same disease, around the same age, who's struggling with the same things, who knows what to do, or 5 years ahead of you so that they can mentor you through all the struggles you're having with school or insurance or et cetera, et cetera. And what we found is that having a rare and undiagnosed disease is such a unique place to be, although together, rare and undiagnosed diseases account for a vast majority of genetic disorders. There's a lot that goes on with that uncertainty, and one of the largest portions of that uncertainty is this social uncertainty, right? So I'm seeing nodding heads. So it's that feeling of being alone, no one else knows what I'm going through. None of the physicians I go to believe me when I say there's something wrong with my 8-month-old, and it's just a gut feeling and I don't know how to explain it, but there's something there, and they keep telling me there's nothing wrong. Go home, wait another year, they'll be fine, right? And no parent wants to say, no, I'm serious, there's something wrong with my kid. But there's this missing validation because it's so hard to describe what's going on. And then compound that by the fact that there's often a lack of words to describe what's going on, right? Autism doesn't really describe what's going on with my kid. It's not like they have Down syndrome and everybody nods when I say that's what's wrong, that was a quick answer. The mom at the pool says, oh, okay, never mind, I don't need to ask any more questions, I know what that is. All these rare and undiagnosed diseases require so much more work and effort to really explain what's going on. And it can be very isolating with medical professionals, with friends, family, really with the whole world, trying to explain what's going on without exhausting yourself and reliving it every time you do it. So what we found is that social support is everything. And I bring this up in part because I think it's a huge tribute to what you all have accomplished here with the CDG Congress and with each of the countries' groups. Because really the biggest thing I think we can do as professionals and parents is help tie people together like this and create a community where it only takes 1 or 2 words before someone says, oh, I know what you're talking about. We've been through that with our kid. This is what we did. Have you tried that? And a lot of time with medical professionals, it's that struggle to find someone who's willing to take your concerns serious and, do that one extra test that seems unnecessary but might lead to the diagnosis. So it's working to develop a community where you don't feel so isolated and where you feel like you can be supported and have people who understand what you're going through. So as a genetic counselor, while I'm very interested in that in a research sense, I'm also interested in it because I think it's a unique opportunity for us to really help out. I view part of my job as identifying these networks for social support, so knowing that there's even a CDG community and knowing who to put someone in touch with, or connecting parents who maybe neither of their children have a diagnosis, but they seem really similar, and they're about the same age, and they're from the same area. So maybe it's just someone you can, grab a coffee with and share your stories and your struggles without having to explain everything. I also think being trained in both the medical side of things and the counseling side of things, we're a great person to come to help, practice telling that story, that elevator pitch, if you will, about what's up with your child, so that when you get asked at a restaurant or at the pool or at the park, what's going on, you can give a short little description that explains it to the extent that you want to, but doesn't make you feel like you're lying, because I've heard many a times, I wish I could just say autism or epilepsy, but that's not what's really going on, right? There's more there. There's more to that story. So I think utilizing genetic counselors in that way is wonderful. And I think it really represents these shared goals of patient organizations, providers, and researchers, that part of our job is to get the word out and to make more of these rare diseases known and give language that makes them approachable to the general public or ties a rare disease with a very common disease. And this is why you should care about it, because it's relevant to this disease that everybody's heard of. And just trying to get more people involved and aware, and more physicians involved and aware, because obviously the group we have here is very aware of CDGs and how to test for them and diagnose them, but a lot of people don't get picked up and don't get diagnosed for quite some time because it's not the first thing that comes to mind. And of course, it's not the easiest of diseases to diagnose. As we've seen through many presentations, there are variable symptoms, and there is no real clear pattern that absolutely guarantees a CDG. So I think getting the word out can only serve to help. The second lesson I wanted to talk about actually dovetails nicely with the talk about siblings. So this is a family we saw in the UDP about a year ago, and they have 2 boys who both have very similar presentations. And I'll give you a little bit more about them. So the older one was diagnosed with childhood onset schizophrenia at about 3 to 4 years. And I can tell you, when I first heard that, I was flabbergasted. I didn't know you could be diagnosed that young with schizophrenia, so I really wasn't sure what we were walking into. But at about 12 years of age, he started having neurodegenerative symptoms. So his gait started changing. He was slurring a lot of speech. He seemed to be losing himself, even though the medications hadn't changed recently, and so people started wondering what else could be going on. Around the same time, his younger brother started developing some psychiatric and mental health concerns, and they began to treat him as though he was a carbon copy of his brother. But of course, we still didn't really know what was going on. So they came to the UDP in hopes of arriving at a cleaner diagnosis than its childhood onset schizophrenia, compounded by the number of antipsychotics and steroids your boys have been on for their lives. So while that is all overwhelming, and I could talk to you about the boys for a while, what I actually want to focus on is their older sister, who I'll call MK. When they came to NIH, she was 18 years old, and she was about 2 weeks away from heading off to college for her first year. She was like a second mother to these boys, and she remembers every admission they have ever had, the 6-month stays at NIH to take them off of their psychiatric medications, the banging on the glass because he didn't want to be left alone, all of it, all the negative, all the positive. And on the surface, it would be very easy to say that the rest of her life will be colored in not such a great way by the childhood she had. And often in genetics, the information we share isn't the most uplifting and encouraging, right? There are very few genetic diseases that people are like, yes, I am so glad that's my diagnosis. I always wanted that disease, right? Most of them overwhelmingly have something negative, or they're going to get worse, or there are huge steps you have to take to prevent what's going to happen. So what this family and what almost every family I've seen in the UDP has taught me about is the resiliency of humans and their families, and how well people can cope with things that just seem unimaginable. I mean, childhood onset schizophrenia at 3 to 4. I don't even know where to begin with that. So MK started college, and she's studying biology and psychology, and she actually applied, and we had her in NIH UDP for the summer to do research. And to me, what that meant to me was seeing how well she succeeded, and she's taken this experience as a sibling of a child with special needs, 2 kids with special needs, and turned it into this wonderful opportunity for personal growth. And she has huge empathy for every patient we've seen, and it's really guided her in what she wants to do. And I've seen it with every family, but this family just stuck out in my mind. Just how amazing it is to see how well families like all of you sitting here really turn what could be a very negative, make it or break it moment, and turn it into this wonderful thing where you found new direction and you've come together to form congresses and communities and international meetings of professionals and really driven the science to keep up with your kids. So I applaud you all for your ability to do that. So take-home messages. What is genetic counseling? We're there to really help you understand the science, to make the science relevant for you, to help you understand what it means to be genetic, what's a gene, but also, and the more important part of the job, I think, what does that mean for you, the people in your life, and your child? And how are you going to get through that and have it be an opportunity for growth? How can we help families with CDGs? I think in the ways I've laid out, but I'd also love to hear from all of you how you think genetic counselors can better serve you all. It's an up-and-coming field still. We routinely change what we define ourselves as, and we grow and expand in ways we didn't think we would. So I'd love to hear more about that. And the lessons I've learned of really I feel lucky to have the job I have and work with families like all of yours. So thank you very much.